Shakespeare was a barely educated man with an illiterate Glover of a father. They were so poor that Shakespeare had to be removed from school at around age 13. He was never a classics apprentice, but rather a butcher's apprentice. He knew nothing of stagecraft, never traveled past London, and there were very few concrete facts about his life. How can the greatest wordsmith come from such a background? The answer is simple. He was not the real William Shakespeare. Francis Bacon is the real William Shakespeare.
Francis Bacon was born in 1561 in York House Strand to Sir Nicholas Bacon, who was an English politician, and Anne Bacon, an English scholar. He attended Trinity College, Cambridge, at the age of 12, and he then entered Gray's Inn, a London law school, and tried to become a politician afterwards. He spent 3 years with the French court from the years 1576 to 1579. And under Queen Elizabeth and James I, he rose to the highest political office, Lord Chancellor. He was the leader of a literary society of poets, and the Shakespearean Authorship Trust notes, quote, "He is known to have been involved with writing and producing masques for the Inns of Court, and he wrote plays for the stage and speeches for court pageants," end quote. He was celebrated throughout his life as a great public servant, philosopher, and writer until he died in 1626.
Francis Bacon became the strongest candidate to be the real William Shakespeare in the 19th century, and here's how. Joseph Hall and John Marston, in an exchange of satires published between 1597 and 1598, identify Francis Bacon as the author of the Shakespeare poems Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece. His friends identify him as the writer of Shakespeare. During the period between the Renaissance and the early modern era, he was one of the leading figures in natural philosophy. In 1856, the Honorable William Henry Smith wrote a letter to Lord Ellesmere trying to persuade him that Francis Bacon was the real William Shakespeare. He adamantly argued in favor of Francis Bacon by giving multiple examples of him writing plays, including The Dumb Shows. He said that it is impossible for someone like Shakespeare to be the author because there is neither record nor rumor of his having exhibited any precocity of talent. Bacon has more ground to be the real Shakespeare. In fact, people truly believed he was Shakespeare. That in 1916 there was a court case held to debate the authenticity of William Shakespeare as the author of the plays. The Honorable Richard S. Tuhill judged the case. They ruled multiple clauses in favor of Bacon. The name Shakespeare was only a disguise. Shakespeare was an uneducated man, and Bacon was educated in English, French, Latin, German, and Italian. His education was far superior than Shakespeare's and anyone else his age. Being a playwright was frowned upon in England, so Francis Bacon could have used a pseudonym and published his works under it to hide his name. By his published works, he created the bilateral cipher. Elizabeth Wells Gallup used this cipher to decode his works according to the directions he left. She found that the name or character Shakespeare were used by Bacon as a pseudonym to publish facts, stories, and statements. The words of Francis Bacon's friends state that he was Shakespeare. Even today, the Shakespearean Authorship Trust states that Bacon wrote in numerous different styles and successfully imitated other people's styles, which means he could have faked his style to be Shakespeare.
And the Journal of Education states that, quote, being a playwright was frowned upon in England, end quote. Therefore, Bacon could not associate himself with the plays that he created and must have used Shakespeare's name as a front for his plays. Bacon admitted that he was the source of John Hayward's book, the first part of the life and reign of King Henry III. Bacon said, quote, which though it grew from me, went after about in others' names, end quote. This meant that he was at the minimum a contributor to the Shakespearean plays. The evidence previously stated shows very strongly that he could have been the sole author of many of them. He considered publishing his philosophical works under a pseudonym as well. Many Shakespeare lovers now dismiss the idea that Shakespeare was written by someone other than the man himself. Though Bacon was a prominent candidate in the 19th and 20th centuries, now few believe him to be the true author. A Dartmouth data mining study partially confirms these beliefs, showing not much correlation from Shakespeare's words to Bacon's. However, as we previously stated, the Shakespearean Authorship Trust noted that Bacon, as he was a very well-educated man and spoke many languages, was able to imitate and use other people's styles of writing, unlike the uneducated man that Shakespeare was. This must have been what happened with Shakespeare. As Bacon was a published philosopher and public servant, because many were familiar with his works, he would not want people to notice the similarities between the two styles and realize that he was the lousy playwright of Shakespeare. Though Bacon's lived experiences matched those depicted in the plays, and though he lived all throughout Shakespeare's lifetime, he used the name Shakespeare to disguise himself from a life in the arts.
To conclude, there are minimal facts that we know about Shakespeare's life, and even some of his works need to be filled in. However, what we do know about Shakespeare's life does not match up with the works he allegedly created. Francis Bacon's life matches up perfectly with the lifestyles portrayed in the works of Shakespeare, as he was a renowned philosopher, politician, and public servant who knew 5 different languages. Because of this, he became one of the top contenders for the real writer of Shakespeare's works.